Hey, did you know there was a new Star Wars movie out in theaters right now? Yeah, called The Mandalorian and Grogu. Honestly, if your answer was no, I genuinely wouldn't be surprised, as there's noticeably very little amount of any hype surrounding the film. As of the time of writing this, the movie has been out in theaters for a little over a week now, and it's doing not great at the box office. So far, it's not a flop necessarily, but it's also certainly not a hit, which is absolutely wild to think about. This is a Star Wars movie, the first one in theaters in 7 years, and it arrives in multiplexes with little to no fanfare, as well as an absolutely non existent carbon footprint in terms of relevancy within current pop culture. Seriously, who do you know within your circle that's actually talking about this movie? If you're a younger viewer, you may be thinking to yourself, so what? People just aren't interested in this one movie. Well, for about nearly 50 years, a brand new Star Wars film was never treated as simply just another movie. A new release was always greeted as massive pop culture shifting events. So what happened? There's a whole lot of fingers being pointed and blame being shifted around, but in my mind, the single biggest culprit for the downfall of Star Wars in pop culture is simply that there's too much damn Star Wars! Seriously, bar none, that's the biggest issue. There is too much of it, and it's been going on for far too long. Star Wars is suffering from something that many of the other big Hollywood franchises are dealing with right now. That being franchise fatigue. That fatigue being especially highlighted now that we are seeing a crop of new original films dominating not just the box office, but pop culture. Before I continue, I want to make it clear up top that I am not one of those grifters who complain about Star Wars being woke. That does not bother me, and I really don't think it has any bearing on the general public's perception of the series. No, to me, the biggest culprit is just pure oversaturation, to the point that Star Wars has completely lost its magic. For nearly 5 decades, Star Wars was not just a big movie franchise, it was the movie franchise. Multiple entries in the series sit high up on lists of all-time highest grossers at the box office. But this goes beyond just box office. Star Wars was a pop cultural juggernaut. When a new movie was coming out, the media blitz around it was insane. A new Star Wars movie was an event, the movie-going event of any given year. The movies would be talked regularly on the news, both local and national, discussed endlessly online in forums and YouTube. Back before purchasing tickets online was common, people used to line up around the block outside of movie theaters days in advance, sometimes weeks. There is news footage from 1999 showing some of these rabid fans literally camping out for days on end just to get tickets for Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. When that movie did come out, an estimated 2.2 million Americans called out of or skipped work to see it opening day. So, did I say a new Star Wars movie was an event? No, it was often a national holiday, at least in the United States. A similar mania struck moviegoers 11 years ago when the long-awaited Episode 7 came out, The Force Awakens, a movie you could not avoid even if you tried. You couldn't go online or watch TV or listen to the radio without hearing some sort of mention of The Force Awakens. In 2015, it was a pop culture obsession. Flash forward to today, though, and once again, a brand new Star Wars movie is currently in theaters. You can go and see the movie right now if you want to, no one's stopping you. But the general consensus both online and in public is that no one really seems to care. There sure as hell wasn't 2.2 million people calling out of work to see the movie opening day, and looking at the drop in box office in its second weekend, it seems that not many people are interested in seeing this at all. Hell, I haven't even seen the movie. Yeah, that's actually kind of sad for me to say out loud. I used to love Star Wars. Like many kids, especially ones growing up in the 90s, Star Wars was almost a religion to me. I loved the original trilogy, I watched them endlessly on VHS, and was always there opening weekend for when the prequels came out. With Mandalorian and Grogu though, this is the first Star Wars movie in the series that I was alive for that I don't even plan on seeing. Not just in theaters, but probably not when it's streaming either. I just don't have any interest. I saw the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian and liked them well enough. I didn't have an interest in seeing the 3rd season, so I never did. In fact, I sort of gave up watching all of the Star Wars shows after Kenobi. So the idea of a theatrical adaptation of a show I already dipped out on held little interest for me. Then the trailers for Mando came out, and those also didn't excite me. And finally, the reviews started coming out, and the general consensus from both critics and audiences was that it was fine. It's not terrible, it's not great, it's just kind of there. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of at an age in my life where I feel like I just don't have the time for something middling, you know? My watch list of movies I genuinely do want to see but haven't yet is humongous. Movies that people have emphatically recommended to me, or classics from around the world that seem so exciting and interesting. I've literally got thousands of movies in lists on Letterboxd that I genuinely want to watch. Why would I waste 2 hours of my life on a movie I'm not even interested in seeing, when the absolute best anecdotal review of it I've heard is, yeah, it was alright, I guess. I ain't got time for alright! I have the entirety of Yasujiro Ozu's filmography to go through. So no, I'm not interested in the brand new Star Wars movie. Judging by the box office and lack of discussion surrounding it online, it seems like most people aren't interested in it. So what the hell happened? How did the once reigning juggernaut of movie franchises become so boring and stale? I believe Star Wars has lost cultural relevancy simply because there's just so much of it now. I mean, let's look at the history of the series, shall we? Within the span of 6 years, from 1977 to 1983, there was the original Star Wars trilogy, which at the time felt like a cohesive whole, a beginning, a middle, and an end. There was closure, people could enjoy the full story from start to finish. I mean, you could watch all 3 movies in one day if you wanted to, and a trilogy would remain for the next 16 years. Not a single other movie came out. No, we are not counting the weird made-for-TV Ewok movies, get that shit out of my face. Eventually, there came The Phantom Menace in 1999. The first Star Wars film in 16 years, oh my god, everyone was freaking out. Why? Because of the scarcity of Star Wars movies. That's a word I'm going to be using a lot of, by the way, scarcity. Because in the same way that scarcity within economics fundamentally increases the value of goods, so too did scarcity increase the value of Star Wars films. And well, all franchises at a certain point, it's supply and demand. The more supply you have, the less demand there is, and vice versa. Anyway, between 1977 and 2005, a total of 6 Star Wars films were made, period. Which, yeah, 6 films is a lot for any series, but spread out over 28 years, and it never felt like too much. There were long enough gaps in between releases of films that at no point did the public feel oversaturated with Star Wars. The feeling that the series was special and exciting still remained. A magical movie treat that you were lucky to get every few years. And then, Disney took over and cranked up the amount of media produced tenfold. Their first movie out of the gate was The Force Awakens in 2015. Since 2015 to now, a total of 11 years, there have been 5 more theatrically released movies, 7 live-action series, 10 seasons in total, and 6 animated series that are all canonical within the mythos of Star Wars. And oh my god, it's just too much. I know there's people who love a lot of these, and I'm really not bashing them, but just the quantity is overwhelming. Let's look at the live-action series. These shows, for all intents and purposes, are basically just long movies. The episodes themselves are short, so the total runtime for most shows, without credits, range between 3 to 4 hours. They also have the budgets and production values that rival big studio blockbuster movies being released in theaters. And again, they're all supposed to be canon within the series. So, in a sense, these 10 seasons are just like 10 long movies. So we've got 12 theatrically released live-action Star Wars movies now, with 10 live-action series, basically 22 movies. And the cartoon shows on top of it? Oh my god, just make it stop. We don't need it. I mean, I don't at least. Give it a break. Let's let the series breathe a little bit. Let us miss Star Wars for a moment. I know I mentioned up top that the Mandalorian movie was the first one in theaters in 7 years, which is a long time, but it doesn't feel like that to the public when Disney has been shoving out endless seasons of televisions for the past 7 years as well. Star Wars has never gone away. There was never a chance for anyone to miss it. I'm not alone in feeling this. Qui-Gon Jinn himself, Liam Neeson, has also expressed that the sheer volume of Star Wars media has diluted the franchise. Star Wars used to feel magical because there were so few movies. And now, it's just another corporate commercial that people are growing tired of. I know that many people would argue that the problem is really with the quality of these movies and shows, which, sure, I do think absolutely has some effect, but even the well-received spin-offs dilute how special Star Wars once felt. The TV show Andor has pretty much universal acclaim. Critics adore it, audiences love it. Many people hail it as the best thing within the franchise in years, maybe even decades. And yet even Andor, for how great it is, also contributes to the dilution of Star Wars. The sheer fact that Andor exists makes the original trilogy and the world George Lucas created feel less special. There is now too much media set in this fictional universe, good or bad. Again, Star Wars is not alone in this. The 2010s and 2020s, for the most part, have been a deluge of endless franchise sequels, remakes, reboots, etc. Within the studios, the belief for the past few decades has been that recognizable IP is king, that any new idea or original concept was risky and dangerous. That belief, though, is being shaken. As of the time of writing this, 2 movies are doing everything that Star Wars is not. The 1-2 punch of indie horror that is Obsession and Backrooms. Both of these films are absolutely killing it at the box office. Obsession in particular is seeing an increase of ticket sales day after day, 3 weeks in a row at a rate that is virtually unheard of. It's a full-blown phenomenon that has perfectly captured the zeitgeist of the time, specifically with younger audience members. Gen Z are the ones leading the charge, as the film feels scientifically engineered for them. The movie is made by and for Gen Z, with young director Curry Barker bringing a story about youth from an authentic perspective. Not only that, the fact that Obsession is a completely original film, not tied to any source material, is incredible. What does this show us? That when an original idea is pitted against the 12th sequel in a 50-year-old never-ending franchise, audiences have chosen the original movie instead. Audiences have been clamoring for something new. Again, these past couple decades in particular have just been oversaturated with the recycling of older properties again and again and again. Star Wars, Star Trek, Jurassic Park, Fast and the Furious, The Terminator, Transformers, Marvel, DC, and so many more. Hollywood has relied for so long on the nostalgia factor for properties created in the 70s or the 80s. But now, in real time, we're seeing the turning point. An entire generation, maybe even 2 including Gen Alpha, has had to grow up with the reheated leftovers of franchises they don't really care for. The younger generation doesn't have nostalgia for Transformers, they don't care. This has created a vacuum of an entire generation longing for something new. A generation looking to embrace not the franchises their parents and grandparents loved, but something original and made specifically for them. Obsession is that answer, one not relying on nostalgia, but planting its own flag as an original work that is aimed at this current generation. The other film blowing up at the box office right now is Backrooms. This is another film that is quite literally made by a Gen Z filmmaker for a Gen Z audience. Backrooms, however, is based off of a recognizable IP. Well, is it IP? I actually don't know who legally owns the rights to the concepts of the Backrooms. Anyway, not really important. What is important is that the Backrooms as an idea was created entirely online just a few years ago. It started as a post on 4chan and quickly caught fire. Countless creepypastas were created about the Backrooms, fan-made horror video games were created, endless memes, and of course, Kane Parsons himself creating a series of extremely viral horror shorts that he released on YouTube. This entire concept sprang about through internet culture, and the result of that internet sensation being adapted into a feature film has shown us an R-rated horror indie film opening to more at the box office than a Star Wars movie did. It's just blowing my mind in the best possible way. Star Wars is no longer dominant in pop culture. The internet is pop culture now, and Gen Z is clearly more interested in stories that were created online for their generation. The box office success of both Obsession and Backrooms is so exciting to me, and the fact that both are absolutely crushing a Star Wars movie financially is absolutely something Hollywood studios are going to take note of. Make no mistake. Now, to be fair, Hollywood studios may be taking the wrong lessons from this. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we get 12 more Backroom sequels after this, and maybe in a decade's time, someone else will be making a franchise fatigue video about Backroom movies. But I also think that the writing is clearly on the wall. People are clamoring for something new. People are tired of just reheated leftovers of franchises that should have ended years ago. The dismantling of endless franchises won't happen overnight. There are plenty of big movies coming out in 2026 that are sequels to long-running series. Toy Story 5, Spider-Man Brand New Day, Avengers Doomsday, Hunger Games 5, you get the picture. But the cracks are beginning to show. I believe the first blow has been struck, and we will, over the course of the next several years, see the domino effect of young indie filmmakers making films that resonate more with audiences than the big studio IPs. This whole thing about obsessions and Backrooms reminds me an awful lot of Star Wars. No, I don't mean the franchise or Star Wars the IP. I don't even mean the original trilogy. I mean 1977's Star Wars, long before it had the amended title of Episode 4, A New Hope. You see, for as much of a nerd as I was growing up, fanboying over the lore of Star Wars, I really don't have any interest today in what people commonly refer to as geek culture. The people who talk endlessly about the lore of Star Wars, Marvel, DC, comic books, etc. I'm a nerd, don't get me wrong, but my geeky interest is in cinema itself, filmmaking, film history, world cinema. For example, within the last year, there was, finally, the re-release of the 1932 Joan Crawford starring film Letty Linton, a movie that, due to legal reasons, was unable to be screened for the past 80 years and was believed would never be seen by the public ever again. Well, the copyright for that film expired and people are now able to see it, in a restored version too, no less, for the first time in 80 years. And that is the kind of thing that gets me excited. Seeing a restored print of a 1930s Joan Crawford movie is endlessly more exciting to me than knowing that Zeb Garabine is in the Mandalorian and Grogu movie. I'm not dismissing you if that's your bag, I'm just illustrating where I'm at personally. And that's sort of where my feelings towards Star Wars now lie. My love and admiration towards the original film has much more to do with its place in film history than it does with its place in canon. Before it was a franchise, Star Wars was just one of the many amazing films to come out in the new Hollywood era that occurred between the late 60s through the 70s. Discussing this era would take up an entire video in itself, so in short, if you're unaware, the new Hollywood era was a period in time in Hollywood where the old studio system fell to the wayside, and what emerged was the explosion of talent by young, bold, auteur filmmakers. That period was a goldmine for studios taking risks on movies and letting directors have near carte blanche in terms of what they made. This is the era that gave us such legendary directors as Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, Brian De Palma, William Friedkin, and of course, George Lucas. And viewing Lucas's film, Star Wars, in that context, not as a franchise-making machine, but as an auteur work of bold imagination within the new Hollywood era, is what excites me and inspires me the most. People gravitated to that first Star Wars because it was new, it was original. Of course, George Lucas wore his inspirations on his sleeve, but the culmination of his vision was something people had never seen before. It captured the world's imagination, which is something that Star Wars just no longer does. While the original Star Wars film was inspired by the likes of Flash Gordon, the samurai films of Akira Kurosawa, and the westerns of John Ford, modern-day Star Wars is only referencing itself. The franchise is a snake eating its own tail at this point. Afraid to try anything new, just showing us the same imagery and telling the same story over and over. Is it any surprise, really, that the two most talked about movies of the early summer are two original works by two young filmmakers, both showing a new vision and telling new stories? To be clear, I don't have an inherent problem with sequels in general. In fact, some of the greatest films ever made have been sequels. I spoke nostalgically about the original Star Wars trilogy and believe that both Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi are excellent movies, and both of them take the original story in new and interesting directions. Sequels can be good. Like many others, I'm eagerly awaiting Dune Part 3, but as with the original Star Wars trilogy, I'm hoping Warner Bros. Decides to cap off Dune as a trilogy, despite there being a dozen other Dune books to adapt. We've got a great thing going with Dune, and I worry that an endless string of middling sequels will lessen the legacy of Denis Villeneuve's vision. For me, where franchise fatigue kicks in is when a series has a very logical endpoint, and yet studios continue to push out more movies, with no clear direction, no plan, just an endless cycle of unnecessary sequels that come across devoid of any artistic ambition, and whose sole purpose is to make money. There are, admittedly, a couple long-running film series that I believe are able to get away with their quantity. James Bond, for instance, has been a film series since 1962, and there are now 25 official films and counting. Bond, however, has sidestepped the problems that plague other long-running series. James Bond has, cleverly, been broken down into several distinct eras, with each era serving as a bit of a reboot of the whole enterprise. Every so often, a new actor is cast in the role of Bond, and the films themselves have grown and changed to fit in with the decade they're releasing in. It's honestly a joy to watch the evolution of Bond in film history from the 1960s through to the present. So every time a new iteration of Bond comes out, it feels fresh and new, at least for a little while, until inevitably it's time for a new reboot and a changing of the guard. In addition, since the late 80s, Bond films have been staggered out quite nicely. We don't get a new film year after year, there isn't endless live-action TV shows set within the Bond universe, so when a new movie comes out, it remains feeling like an event. Hell, the last Bond film that came out was 5 years ago already. And by the looks of it, we won't be getting the next one until 2028 at the earliest, if not 2029. I mean, talk about a large gap in between entries. This isn't me saying that James Bond will never be oversaturated or that people will always continue to show up for them. I mean, nothing lasts forever. But I think Bond has proven to be a series that is not beholden to the originals in the way that Star Wars has. Not every franchise needs to go on as long as 007. Star Wars had a very clear endpoint in its story, and that really should have been the end of things. Same goes for the likes of Indiana Jones and Lord of the Rings. So, what's next for Star Wars? Well, next year we have a new movie called Starfighter starring Ryan Gosling coming out. Maybe A-list star power will help drive more public interest in the franchise? I'm not sure. If that does well at the box office, then prepare for several Gosling-led Starfighter sequels. If that movie performs like Mandalorian and Grogu did, however, I'm really not sure what they'll do next. Disney spent $4 billion to acquire Star Wars, so they're not just going to give up on it. I do envision the future of Star Wars having more movies and shows, just maybe not at the frequency they have been coming out, however. Maybe some of these projects will be good and even make a nice little profit at the box office. However, I really think that the age of a Star Wars movie making $1 billion in theaters is over, as is the era of anyone really getting excited for them other than the die-hard fans. Maybe Star Wars can take a page out of Bond's playbook and really reinvent the series. Tonally, visually, structurally. Hire auteur filmmakers with bold visions that take risks. But even then, as I said earlier, the more of these they make, good or bad, the less special the whole thing feels. Look, I'm not gonna boycott future Star Wars projects or anything like that. If I hear one is really good and looks unique enough, sure, I'll check it out. But my love for the series has diminished. And as with most things I feel nostalgic for, I know I'm never going to be able to go back to how I once felt.